Young Sheldon is full of moments that make you completely rethink everything you thought you knew about George Cooper as a father. From driving his family to NASA so Sheldon could meet a scientist, to shielding Missy with his own body during a tornado, I'll be going over every moment that answers whether George Cooper was actually a good dad, starting with one of the most complicated. If your entire understanding of George Cooper comes from the Big Bang Theory, you think he was a drunk, dumb redneck who was barely a parent. And honestly, that's not your fault, because that is exactly the version Sheldon Cooper sells for 12 seasons. He describes George as a heavy drinker who forced him to watch and play football, who once shot the TV after a game, who taught him archery and shooting while apparently drunk, and who argued constantly with Mary until he died. Missy gave George a world's greatest dad mug, and Sheldon dismisses it like the whole idea is a joke. According to Big Bang Theory Sheldon, George basically coasted through fatherhood until a heart attack ended it. Then Young Sheldon premieres and spends 7 seasons proving that the person who told you all of that is, without question, the least reliable narrator in the entire story. The show doesn't just soften George, it directly contradicts the worst things Sheldon said about him. The alleged affair with another woman? That was Mary role-playing as Helga in Season 7, Episode 4. Sheldon walked in, saw his dad with a woman he didn't recognize, and created a memory so powerful it gave him a lifelong 3-knock habit. Except the woman was his mother. The job Sheldon says George lost for stealing? Young Sheldon reveals that George actually lost a coaching job because he reported a recruiting scandal. He was the one who told the truth, not the thief. And the supposedly absent, emotionally useless father? He appears in 139 episodes, and in a huge number of them, he is physically driving his children somewhere, fighting for their opportunities, or quietly solving a problem nobody asked him to solve. But here's what makes this question so much harder than The Big Bang Theory lied. Young Sheldon told the truth. Young Sheldon doesn't turn George into a saint. It shows a man who genuinely loves his kids, genuinely tries, and genuinely falls short in ways that actually matter. And the gap between what George does and what George fails to do is where the real answer lives. Which means we have to start with the stuff George got right, because there is a lot of it, and it's the reason this question is even debatable. But before I get into that, I need to tell you about one specific moment from Season 1 that sets up everything else in this video. And if you don't understand this moment, the rest of the evidence will mean something completely different than what it actually proves. Everyone remembers the Cape Canaveral trip. Season 1, Episode 8. George loads Sheldon and Georgie into the car and drives them to Florida to see a shuttle launch. It's one of those classic family road trip memories that sounds perfect on paper, but the launch gets canceled. The whole trip looks like a waste of time and money for a family that doesn't have a lot of either. And instead of being angry or cutting the trip short, George does something that adult Sheldon later calls one of his best childhood memories and says he regrets never telling his dad about. He invites Sheldon to explain how lightning works. That's it. He just asks his kid to teach him something. A football coach who can barely follow his son's science homework sits in a motel and gives his 9-year-old genius the floor. And that small moment reveals exactly how George parents when he's at his best. He stops trying to make Sheldon fit into his world and instead steps into Sheldon's, even when he doesn't understand what's happening there. And that pattern shows up over and over again across the entire series. George Cooper's strongest quality as a father is that when something genuinely matters, he physically shows up and does the hard thing. His love isn't verbal. It's not "I'm proud of you" or "I believe in you." It's driving to Houston because a NASA representative dismissed his son, and George is not going to let that stand. In Season 1, Episode 6, after a scientist's secretary blocks Sheldon, George forces his way past her, so his kid's idea will at least get heard. He doesn't understand the science. He doesn't pretend to, but he understands that his son deserves a chance, and he makes sure that chance happens through sheer stubbornness. In Season 1, Episode 10, George and Mary allow Sheldon to attend a gifted school in Dallas. When Sheldon wants to come home, George doesn't force him to stay for the sake of appearances, or because the family gave things up to send him. He just goes and picks his kid up. Then in Season 2, Episode 9, George is offered a better coaching job at the University of Tulsa. This is a major step up for a man whose whole identity is tied to coaching and putting food on the table. After serious conflict with Mary, he turns it down. He could have pushed harder. He he could have made the family move. He chose to stay because uprooting 3 kids and a wife who didn't want to go wasn't worth the career bump. And this isn't limited to Sheldon. In Season 3, Episode 6, George initially calls baseball a boys' activity when Missy wants to play, which is a terrible first response. But then he reverses himself, contacts the team, takes Missy to the tryout, and fights for her to get a fair shot. In Season 6, Episode 1, Georgie gets arrested after a cigarette smuggling trip to Mexico, and George borrows part of $2,500 in bail money and drives 8 hours to retrieve him and Mima from jail. He makes his disappointment clear, but he still does the expensive, exhausting work of rescuing his son. And then there's the tornado. Season 6, Episode 22. George is driving with Missy when the storm hits. He pulls the car over, leads her into a ditch, and physically covers her body with his own as the tornado passes overhead. When it's over, Missy apologizes for how she's been behaving recently and says she loves her family. George forgives her immediately. If you stopped the conversation here, you'd say George was a great dad. And a lot of fans do exactly that. They point to NASA and Cape Canaveral and the tornado and say case closed. But those are all emergencies, crises, and one-time events. And the harder question about fatherhood isn't whether you show up when the house is on fire. It's whether you notice the kids who aren't screaming. Because George has 3 children, and the show makes it painfully clear that he does not see all 3 of them equally. And the way that plays out is going to change how you interpret every single heroic moment I just listed. Sheldon is obviously the kid who takes up the most space in the Cooper house. Everyone knows that. Most fans assume Georgie and Missy just deal with it and move on. But young Sheldon actually tracks what happens to the kids who don't get the attention, and the damage is specific. Start with Georgie. George coaches him, supports his early sales ventures when he realizes Georgie has a genuine talent for business, lets him continue living in the garage after he drops out of school against his parents' wishes, and drives 8 hours to bail him out of jail. On paper, that's a solid father-son relationship. But the show gives us a very specific scene in Season 3, Episode 12, that changes the whole picture. George realizes that his own father rarely praised him. He recognizes the pattern. He sees that he's repeating it with Georgie. And he tries to tell Georgie that he's proud of him. The attempt is so awkward and uncomfortable that it basically falls apart before it lands. He can see the problem clearly. He can name exactly what's wrong. He just cannot make his mouth produce the words that would fix it. And that matters because Georgie later tells George he hopes to be as good a father as him. And at George's funeral, Georgie says his dad always had his back and promises not to let him down. The love went both directions, but one direction was almost entirely silent.
He always had my back.
Now look at Missy. George takes her to Red Lobster in Season 1, Episode 21, and teaches her how to eat lobster. That memory is so important to Missy that she brings it up at his funeral as her way of saying goodbye. He teaches her baseball in Season 3, fights for her spot on a boys' team, helps her when she starts menstruating in Season 4, and chooses to stay home with her when Mary goes to Germany with Sheldon in Season 6. Their relationship has a real foundation, and it's built mostly through sports and shared time rather than words. But in between those moments, Missy's emotional pain repeatedly builds to a full-blown crisis before George reacts to it. In Season 4, Episode 18, George tries to comfort a heartbroken Missy with offers involving boys and ice cream.
Hey, how about we go get some ice cream?
I'm not a child.
Then admits he doesn't know how to talk to her and walks away, leaving the emotional work to Mary. The parents' fight that follows contributes to Missy running away. In Season 6, Episode 13, Missy disappears, and George has to drive around town searching for her. In Episode 15, Missy feels completely forgotten while the entire family's attention goes to Sheldon, Georgie, Mandy, and Cece, and nobody catches it in time. In Episode 16, she steals George's truck and runs away because the feeling of being invisible has become unbearable. The Georgie relationship and the Missy relationship expose the same problem from 2 different angles. George loves both of them. That's never in question anywhere in the show, but his love only kicks in when something goes wrong. It shows up when Georgie needs bail money, or when Missy is physically in danger, or when a crisis has already blown up. It does not show up when Georgie needs to hear "I'm proud of you" on a random Tuesday, or when Missy needs someone to notice that she's slowly falling apart before she reaches the point of stealing a truck and disappearing into the night. And that pattern leads directly into the stuff that makes this question genuinely hard, because George's blind spots as a father aren't limited to bad timing. Some of them are actual choices he makes that put his children in worse positions. And there's one specific moment that I think is the most harmful thing George does as a parent in the entire series. Everyone focuses on the big dramatic stuff when they talk about George's flaws. The drinking, the Brenda situation, the fights with Mary. That's the obvious material. But there's a moment in season 2 that almost nobody talks about. And it's worse than all of those because it involves George deliberately putting one of his kids in an impossible position. In season 2, episode 4, George pressures Sheldon to hide Mima's $300 driving-related fine from Mary. Think about what he's actually doing here. He is asking a child, his child, to carry an adult secret and to lie to the child's own mother because George doesn't want to deal with the fight that telling the truth would cause. And Sheldon becomes severely distressed. The anxiety is visible and immediate. This isn't a situation where George doesn't realize what he's doing. He is actively choosing to make his kid carry a weight that belongs to the adults in the room. He eventually confesses, which means the moment does get resolved. But the episode is clear, specific evidence that George will use his own child as a buffer against a fight with his wife when it's easier than being honest. And that connects directly to the larger pattern, the drinking. The show never labels George an alcoholic, and the wiki itself pushes back against the drunk redneck version from The Big Bang Theory. But it also says he drinks a lot. The Brenda Sparks situation. George turns to his neighbor during a period of serious problems with Mary, opens up to her emotionally, later works at her house. And the unresolved tension between them feeds directly into a fight with Mary at Cece's birth in season 6. The show describes it as a flirtation rather than a full-blown affair, but the line is crossed either way, and the children live in a household shaken up by it. And then there's the balance at home. Mary handles the huge majority of daily household work, emotional care, parenting logistics, and keeping the family running. When she goes to Germany with Sheldon in season 7, Missy has to step in and organize the household herself, assigning chores to the remaining adults. George is visibly surprised at how much invisible work was happening around him the entire time. The fan debate around George often turns into a competition between him and Mary. One side says George was the real hero and Mary was controlling and too pushy about religion. The other side says George gets praised for showing up to a few big moments, while Mary gets destroyed for carrying the actual daily weight of 3 children. But that debate misses the point entirely. The question isn't whether George was better or worse than Mary. It's whether his consistent pattern of showing up during emergencies, protecting his kids physically, giving up career opportunities for the family, and refusing to leave is enough to outweigh the drinking, the emotional distance, the secrecy, and the fact that his love only seemed to fully turn on when someone was already in trouble. And the show gives you an answer, but it doesn't give it to you until George is already dead. And the way it delivers that answer is the most gut-wrenching scene in the entire series. Not because anything tragic happens in it, but because nothing happens in it at all. You'd expect a show about a father's death to build up to it with a massive fight, a dramatic goodbye, or some final moment where he tells his kids everything he never said. George Cooper gets none of that. His last morning in season 7 episode 12 is completely ordinary. He's being considered for a coaching position at Rice, which would have been the proof that his career actually meant something after all those years of sacrifice. He offers Missy a ride. She says no. He tells the family he'll see them later. And then he leaves for work and dies of a heart attack. He never comes home. And nobody in that house said anything meaningful to him before he walked out the door.
See y'all later.
4 o'clock.
At the funeral in season 7 episode 13, every single person who speaks says, in different words, the same thing. Mima, the woman who spent years believing George was never good enough for her daughter, says he was a good man who looked after Mary and earned her respect.
And I will always be proud to call him.
That hits different specifically because the brisket episode years earlier showed us that George had always believed she would never accept him. He died without knowing she did. Georgie says George always had his back and promises not to let him down. Then he goes on to assume the family caretaker role George left behind, looking after Mary, Missy, and eventually Sheldon in ways nobody recognized until years later. Missy remembers Red Lobster, a dinner at a chain restaurant that she shared with her dad when she was a kid. That's the memory she reaches for when she has to say goodbye to her father forever. And she cries because a man who could cover her body during a tornado couldn't always see that she needed him on the quiet days too. Mary tells George she's angry because their relationship had finally gotten good again, right before he was taken from her.
Downs, but we were finally in such a good place. And then
And Sheldon, who spent his entire childhood treating George like he wasn't smart enough to matter, and his entire adulthood telling people his father was basically a failure, sits there knowing that he loved his dad, will always miss him, and will carry the regret of everything he never
I will miss him forever.
said. And then, years later, that regret gets one final layer. In the Big Bang Theory episode, The VCR Illumination, Sheldon and Amy are stuck on a scientific failure that threatens to end their most important work. Someone finds an old VHS tape, and on it, recorded by accident over something else, is George Cooper's halftime speech. And in that speech, George tells his players that failure doesn't make them losers, and that losing can teach them as much as winning. The message was never meant for Sheldon. George didn't know the camera was recording, but those words, delivered to a group of high school football players by a man who had been dead for years, are the thing that gets Sheldon and Amy back on track. They continue the research. They win the Nobel Prize. And Sheldon thanks his dead father for saving him one more time. George Cooper was not a great father. He drank too much, said too little, noticed his quieter kids too late, kept secrets that hurt his family, and let his marriage problems spill into the household in ways that affected all three of his children. But he also drove to NASA and forced open a door so Sheldon's idea would be heard. He turned down a better job because his family didn't want to move. He covered Missy's body with his own during a tornado without a second thought. He drove 8 hours and borrowed money to bail out a son who had broken the law. He tried to say "I'm proud of you" to Georgie and couldn't get the words out, which might be worse than never trying at all, because it proves he knew exactly what was missing and still couldn't close the gap. And his coaching speech, recorded by accident on a VHS tape nobody watched until years after he was gone, ended up helping his youngest son win a Nobel Prize. George Cooper was a deeply flawed man who kept showing up anyway. And the tragedy of his story is that every person standing at his funeral realized too late that showing up was enough. If you watched this whole video, you already like this kind of content.